Hi there, this is Lisa Norton, and I'm here to show you how to do your half square triangles 2 at a time. So if you refer to your pattern, it's on page 4, and it's at the top of the page, and we're going to do the 2 at a time method with the 2x. So you're going to start with a 1 3.5 inch square from each of the fabrics that are called out in your pattern. On the lightest square, you're going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner. I tried to make my pencil mark nice and dark so that it's easier for you to see, but you can do it as light as you like. Your next is you're going to position your 2 squares together, right sides together, and you'll position them so they're exactly squared up. Our next step is we're going to sew 1/4 inch on each side of that drawn line. So I'll be right back. Hi there, I'm back. So I just sewed 1/4 inch seam on either side of that drawn line. My next step is to cut on that drawn line. There you go, 2 half square triangles. Now our next step is to press them, and then we're going to trim them to 2.5 inches. Pull my ironing board over a little. So you'll want to first press, it's called setting the seam when it's closed like that. And then for this block, we're going to press the seam towards the darker fabric. We're going to use the side of our iron. There we go. Our next step is to trim it down to 2.5 inches. So when you trim your squares down to 2.5 inches, you're going to use the diagonal line in your ruler. You align that diagonal line with the diagonal seam of your block. Now, if you have a smaller ruler, I like small rulers for small cuts and big rulers for big cuts, but I know it takes a while to accumulate those nice big rulers. Some of us even have 2.5 inch square rulers. Those are even nice too. When I first saw the tiny ones, I thought they were for keychains, but alas, we actually use those. So you're going to line your diagonal seam up with the seam, your diagonal line of your ruler with the seam of your block. And you're going to find 2.5 inches. So you can see this line right here is on the outside edge. I like to give it a little trim on both sides, so I try to split any difference. Try to avoid the spider hold. That's with your fingers are straight up. The spider hold is this, and it'll swing on you if you use that. And now I'm going to flip it around. I'll line up that diagonal with my diagonal seam. This time I'm going to find my 2.5 inch mark there on my ruler. And flat hand, I'm going to go ahead and give this a trim. There you go. This one's now trimmed to 2.5 inches. Now I like to recommend a product that's called a block lock. And they make block locks specifically for 2.5 inch half square triangles, but cost effective if you use a larger one and then trim them down. The reason I like the block locks is they have this little ridge, and that ridge will grab right onto that seam. So I'm going to swing my, flip it around here. There we go. So my lip of my ruler here, right there, is now going to catch on that seam. And I can slide it up and down on that seam. And what the advantage of this ruler is it'll keep my seam corner to corner. And now I can do the same thing. And this time I'll find my line for my 2.5 inch, align it with my outside edge, making sure my seam is still caught in that groove. And now this one is now trimmed down to 2.5 inch squares. So these two are now ready. Hi, this is Lisa Norton, and I'm here to show you how to do the 4 at a time method for half square triangles. So if you refer to your page number 4, it's the one in the middle called 4 at a time method with a 4x in the parentheses. So this one is a fun one to do. It's fairly easy and simple. You're going to have 2 squares, and they're going to be cut at 4 1/8. So I have my 2 4 1/8 squares. Next, I'm going to line those up so they're perfectly aligned. And now I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam all around the outside edge of my square. All right, now I'm back. I did a 1/4 inch seam on all sides, and you can go off the edges. You don't have to stop exactly at that 1/4 inch. And now I'm going to give it a little bit of a press. I like to add spray starch. This really isn't the preferred method of making half square triangles because we're working with the bias. That's why I like to give it a little spray starch. When working with the bias, you want to be sure not to use any steam, but the spray starch helps it to behave. So we're going to be cutting this once on the diagonal, or actually twice on the diagonal, I suppose, from corner to corner. There we go. And I have my 4 half square triangles. So my next step is to press the seam towards the dark. And now we're going to square it up. And we're going to square it up by using the diagonal, the 45-degree line on our square, and lining it up with the seam of our half square triangle. So there really shouldn't be much to trim off with this one. Basically, this one is just going to be the the little dog, the dog ear trimmed. Just a little sliver on this side. And then we're going to line it up with that 2.5 inch mark on this outside edge. Line up your diagonal. And really, it's just the tiniest of slivers. There, this one's all ready. I'll do that to these other 3, and I'll have my 4 half square triangles done. Hi there, this is Lisa. This time we're going to be talking about the 8 at a time method in order to make your half square triangles. So if you refer to page 4, it's at the bottom portion here, 8 at a time with the 8x in parentheses. So you're going to start with 6 1/4 inch squares. So in this example, I was making a 6 1/4 inch of a square of the dark green and the background. I had already drawn an X from corner to corner on my lighter square, and then I sewed a 1/4 inch seam on either side of those drawn lines. I'll bring it up a little closer so you can see that I have a 1/4 inch seam on either side of those drawn lines. Now, to keep it from wiggling around while I sewed, I just stuck a pin on all 4 sides. My next step now is to give it a quick little press. I like to use a little spray starch when I press mine, so let me give it a quick squirt. And that just helps nest the seam so that it's a little easier to cut. And so now I'm going to be cutting vertically and horizontally. So I'm going to find the halfway measurement. So for 4 1/4, it's going to be 3 1/8, and then I'm going to cut. And it should intersect right at that spot there. Yep, I'm good. And without moving my square, I'm going to do the exact same thing again. And lining up at that intersection, I should be still at 3 1/8. Okay, now the easier part, we're going to cut once on the diagonal, right on that pencil line. There you go. That was a very quick way of making 8 half square triangles. So my next step is to press it with the seam going towards the darker fabric. And then with a square with the diagonal, you're going to line that up and you're going to trim it down to 2 1/2 inches, just like we did with the 2 previous examples.